Hey guys, this is my video covering the astrology for the week of June 29th through Sunday, July 5th. And I don't know if the last 3 weeks were as eventful for you as they were for me, but I think it's safe to say that what the last 3 weeks was this time period which was very dynamic. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of different stuff going on, different seemingly unrelated topics or themes, patterns unfolding, affecting each other, creating this huge mess basically. There was just so much going on that it was very scattered, frenetic, very cluttered. It was hard to even understand anything in a way. Um, Everything was so scattered, and yet at the same time there was this intensity, like this pressure being put on us. And I could talk about what in the astrology makes me describe that time period that way. The main thing is in being in between eclipses, being in the midst of eclipse season basically. We're still in eclipse season, we're still in between eclipses. We have one more happening at the end of this week on Sunday, July 5th. But I do see a major turning point, which actually happened about a week ago, but we're experiencing it now. It's starting to become much more tangible now. So, where the last 3 weeks was scattered, messy, pressurized, cluttered, frenetic, we're now entering a time where things are more or less linear. So, there are still a lot of unknown factors. There's still a lot that we might not understand yet, but we at least know generally what track we're on. And when I talk like this, or really when I talk in any of these videos, I'm talking about what's going on in your life personally as an individual, in all of our lives individually. But I'm also talking about what's happening to us all on a collective level or in the world. Because as above, so below, if you start to break things down and look at it sort of abstractly or even metaphorically, you'll start to notice a lot of the same themes happening in your life as well as in the world, if that makes sense. Yeah. So anyway, so really, what uh, what brought us from the last 3 weeks, the reason why it's becoming so much more linear or uh, focused, more having more or less one direction, is because well, basically, it's because of the new moon solar eclipse which happened on June 21st. Because it was at 0 degrees of a cardinal sign, which 0 degrees Cancer, or in other words, because it happened on the first day of a season, the first day of summer in the northern hemisphere, that means that it was a new beginning. It was a very strong indication of a new beginning happening. Again, that was about a week ago. Um, yeah, so a completely new direction, a new um, you could see it as the past 3 weeks there was this crossroads, and then you basically picked a timeline, if you want to see it that way, or you picked your direction, and then now we're going in that direction. And the reason why I keep saying the last 3 weeks, even though this event happened a week ago, is because new moons they are a new beginning, but they're not tangible right when they happen. So a week ago, or how do I say this? So the reason why it's very clear now is because the moon has gotten enough distance to it from the sun that it has its own light now again, like very much so. So when the moon passes the sun, it's starting a new chapter, but the moon is not visible. The moon has no light to it, so it's what the moon represents is invisible, if that makes sense. So even though it's starting a new cycle, you can't see it yet. And so basically, its effects on us you can't see yet, if that makes sense. So although the new moon solar eclipse happened a week ago and it was very strong, it was very clear that it was a new beginning. Sometimes when things first begin, you don't see them yet because they've just come into the world. They haven't gotten their own momentum going yet. They haven't come outside yet, or they haven't uh, they haven't started to really change things yet, if that makes sense. But with these lunar cycles, if you just give it about a week, once that first quarter moon happens, which in this case happened this last weekend, then you really start to experience the changes that are happening. But again, like if you look at what's happening now and you look at what caused those things, generally a lot of what's happening now was caused. It really started a week ago. If you look at the causes, if that makes sense at all. Okay, so yeah, so we're entering this time that's very linear. It's very much summer now in the northern hemisphere. So um, when you leave the last part of a season and enter a new season, everything becomes much more clear, much more linear. Okay, so this week in general, that's kind of what we're experiencing now. You had a crossroads, you picked your lane, now we're going in that direction. Um, in general, for this week, Mercury's going retrograde in Cancer all week, so that is sort of having us re-examine our feelings, our beliefs, our values. Um, you might you might run into old friends. You might have an ex hit you up, or you might spend more time with family, or people from your past, or in general, it's just a time for it's Mercury's going backwards, so it's a time for reflecting, going into the past, so to speak, or integrating experiences which have already happened to you. Whether that be through literally going to places that are from your past or seeing people from your past, stuff like that. Um, it's sort of some people might experience a time of seclusion at this time, especially if you're a Cancer. You might have more introverted periods or time alone where you can kind of just process and integrate things. That's kind of what it's about. And for this Mercury retrograde in general, okay, this is tricky because Mercury retrograde in general typically represents dysfunction and longer wait times, yeah, at airports, stuff like that, or just things breaking down, cell phones, cars, any kind of technology, things just kind of breaking down, glitching, just various sort of inconvenient mishaps, extra wait times, traffic, stuff like that. But it does differ depending on what sign it's happening, or the aspects, the planets that are aspecting Mercury in this case. So because Mercury is retrograding in Cancer, Cancer is a water sign, and Mercury retrograding in water signs, I've noticed, is generally it's an easier Mercury retrograde. So, if your astrology is very much ruled by Mercury, so in other words, if you have Virgo or Gemini in your as your sun, moon, or rising, generally you'll be more affected by Mercury retrogrades. But this one in particular is relatively easy. So Mercury retrograde would usually make us more introverted, and it would make it harder to communicate. It would make things dysfunctional, like I said. But because Mercury's retrograde in Cancer, which is a water sign, I don't expect so much technology breaking. I haven't really experienced that yet with this Mercury retrograde. And this is common with Mercury retrograde in water signs because the water element is naturally sort of about reflecting on the past and integrating. Um, and Mercury retrograde is also about reflecting on the past and integrating. So it's just generally easy. It's easier. It's more smooth. Water is also the least physical element. It rules things that are non-physical. So Mercury retrograde being in a water sign means that you're integrating and going back over things that are non-physical. Like I said, emotions, um, values, morals, ideas, maybe, stuff like that. So it's generally easier to integrate stuff. These sort of uh, non-physical things. Rather than if it was in another element, like if we're integrating things on a physical level, that would be more physically dysfunctional, obviously, if that makes sense. So yeah, so we've got Mercury retrograde in Cancer all week. So going over feelings, going over people from our past, situations from our past, integrating. A lot of it could be about integrating things that have happened over the past month or so. Because there's just so much new stuff happening that it's important to integrate. And other than that, that's the main thing for this week, and then also like I touched on, we have the last eclipse of this season, which is a lunar full moon eclipse at 14 degrees Capricorn, and it happens Sunday, July 5th. So this week, kind of in general, is just slowly building up toward that eclipse, basically. And we do have some more minor aspects, so I'll go over those when I go day by day. So starting Monday, June 29th, there are no exact planetary aspects, but I did think it was significant that Mars has just entered Aries, and Saturn is retrograde. So it's that's another major thing that's happening this week that I forgot to mention. Saturn retrograde is actually going to enter Capricorn from Aquarius. But right now, as we start out, Monday, Mars just entered Aries a couple days ago, so it's at 1 degree Aries. Saturn is retrograde. It's at the very beginning of Aquarius, going backwards. So it's at 0 degrees Aquarius. It's about to enter Capricorn. Um, so as we start out this week, Saturn and Mars are sextiling. It's not exact to the degree, but it's close enough that I think it's important. So basically, what that means is Saturn represents the government, authority figures, leaders, government, society, stuff like that, the system. Mars is an energy which is very masculine. It's very fiery. It's very driven, very decisive, very instinctive, very active. So Mars sextiling Saturn sort of gives the government or anyone in positions of power or any kind of leaders, it gives them more fiery energy. It gives them more competence, basically. And what I've seen for the past few months is that the government, which is symbolized in the astrology by Saturn, has been very dysfunctional the past several months. It's been very slow to act, and then once it has acted, it's acted sort of maybe not in the right way. You know, whatever you believe politically, I think many people are sort of dissatisfied with how our governments, both local and national, have reacted to different situations. And I'm not going to get into the politics, but basically, I thought it was interesting that this is the first aspect I've seen in a long time where it looks like the government is competent in the sense that it's able to do what it wants to do. And depending on your views, or depending on what people in power wish to do and whether they are correct in their desires or in what they want to do, that would determine whether this is a good or bad thing, basically. So in other words, people in power and the government are more able to do what they want to do, but that could be good. It could be bad. We'll see. It depends. It depends on. I'm sure it will be different depending on which leaders we're talking about or different which situations. But yeah, I do see at the beginning of this week a more active government, and again, state, local, etc. More reactive, more actually doing something about what's going on. And again, that could be good or bad. Other than that, there's no exact aspects. Like I said, on Monday, Moon is going through late Libra in the morning, and then it enters Scorpio around midday. And I should say too that this is from before today, before Monday. But over the weekend, we had a first quarter moon in Libra, which I did talk about. So that's kind of so the past weekend, it would make you more restless, more. It would propel you to want to do something, want to change something. So that could be the bad side of it is that it could make people stressed, restless, anxious. But the good side of it is that you could want to do something. You could be productive or go have fun or something. But it would make you more active in general. So that's kind of a restless aspect that we just experienced this past weekend. But going into Monday and Tuesday, well, especially last half of Monday, going into Tuesday, the moon enters Scorpio, where it starts to trine the sun and Mercury in Cancer. So basically, we have this sort of restless energy over the weekend going into the first half of Monday. And then Monday evening going into Tuesday, it becomes flowing more easily, if that makes sense, or more relaxed. more positive generally, more, more of just a strong, easy time, more relaxed, like I was saying. And it's kind of tricky when I say stuff like that because, as a whole, this whole year is very intense and very eventful and not very relaxed at all. But everything is relative. So when I say Monday and Tuesday are more relaxed, or Tuesday and Wednesday, it's relative, of course. So it's just a relatively relaxed period. Of course, the entire climate is very intense, but we do get a little break from that Monday evening going into Tuesday. Um, Other aspects on Tuesday, June 30th. Okay, so there's a really big one, which is Jupiter conjunct Pluto at 24 degrees Capricorn. So right here, Pluto and Jupiter, 24 degrees Capricorn. And they're pretty much conjunct. They're very close to Saturn at 0 degrees Aquarius as well. So these are all outer planets right here, all three of these. And in general, when I say outer planets, that means that they're much more slower moving. They're much farther away from the sun, so they have a much larger range or larger orbit to cover, and they're much slower. Um, so, and when any two planets pass each other, they start a new cycle. And depending on how fast those planets are moving, that determines how large of a cycle it is. So when you have outer planets, any outer planets conjoin each other, or in other words, pass each other, you're starting a huge new cycle. Cycles that could be multiple years long or decades long, or even 100 years long, depending on which planets are involved. Um, so this is really significant, and this is part of why so many things are happening this year, is because we're having multiple outer planet conjunctions. Um, the first major one was the Saturn Pluto conjunction in January. We also have Jupiter and Saturn conjoining each other in December of this year. So like I said, all these aspects start new cycles. So that's why I say that this year as a whole, we have many cycles ending and many cycles beginning. Lots of stuff ending, lots of stuff beginning. So this is just one more example of that, Jupiter conjunct Pluto. So this week, Jupiter and Pluto are conjunct, but like I said, they're very slow moving. So this aspect doesn't just apply to Tuesday. You could even apply it a month before now and a month after, but it's the most intense on Tuesday, basically. Um, and what you have is Jupiter and Pluto, physically, at least from our perception, are in the same part of the sky. They're in the same direction from Earth. And you can't see Pluto with the naked eye, but if you could, they would essentially look like the same star, like the same spot. And what that means is, some people will say that they're married, sort of, so they're unified. So Jupiter and Pluto's themes in astrology are unified together for this time. And in general, the what Jup- the themes that Jupiter and Pluto have in common will be strengthened right now. And what that is let me just cover really briefly. Jupiter in general represents expansion, optimism, luck, faith in a way, hope. It could represent religion or philosophy. Pluto is not such an easy energy to work with. It's more destructive, it's more intense and serious, it's emotionally intense, it's more about surviving, it's about adapting and evolving. It's the phoenix. So the phoenix is a mythical bird which was said to explode into flames, and then in its ashes would be a new baby bird. So basically, Pluto destroys things, but from the rubble, you are left with something that has higher integrity than what was destroyed. And this is a larger theme that we're experiencing this whole year, is that we're about to enter this new world, essentially. But before we do that, things that are still a part of this world that don't have integrity or that aren't sustainable need to be destroyed. So this is one aspect that's very much an indicator of that. Okay, so Jupiter and Pluto, I kind of described what they're both about, generally speaking. So they don't have a lot in common. but they do both represent truth. Pluto is more the kind of truth about like delving into something and figuring out the real truth, the secrets or the mysteries, figuring out the sort of dark truth behind things. Jupiter is about enlightenment and philosophy, so it's about truth in that aspect. So they both have a moral obligation to the real truth, if that makes sense. Um, so the way I see this, because it's happening in Capricorn, which rules hierarchies and authority figures, I think that for those who seek it, you can find the truth behind your authority figures or what's going on in the world right now. The truth is out there. There's a lot of misinformation out there as well, but I think for those who want the truth, and it could just be about your life as well. Maybe there's these large truths behind yourself that you didn't know, or behind your people that are close to you, or just your life in general, about your world. Uh, Maybe there's these very large patterns or large things in your life that you just haven't been aware of, or you haven't seen in that exact way. That could be that you could have access to now. Information that you didn't have access to before, you could understand now. And in general, this is a very bittersweet aspect. So it might be truth that is discomforting, but which is essential to carry on, to go forward, if that makes sense. Or learning about what's going on in the world right now, it's probably gonna be bittersweet, but um, it's important. It's these large important truths, if that makes sense. Um, yeah, and then other ways that this could manifest is that's one of the more optimistic ways that this could manifest, just seeking truth. Another would be Pluto represents sort of death and destruction, and uh, hopefully it's death and destruction that are necessary in order to conjure up further change or to bring in something better into the world. But still, it's death and destruction. Jupiter sort of expands whatever it touches. It's called the expander. So Jupiter conjoining Pluto could bring about mass death, as it sort of did in January when they conjoined in January, because they conjoined multiple times this year. Um, and again, it could be a sort of bittersweet situation, and I can't imagine a situation where lots of people dying could be good, but it could also bring out about um, maybe a large system in our society crumbling that didn't have integrity. Um, because Jupiter sort of represents organizations in our society, so like churches or I don't know charities, companies, different societies in a way. So we could have destruction of certain parts of our infrastructure that maybe are for the best, even if it's difficult to experience when it's happening. Maybe you need to make room for something better, if that makes sense. So these are really heavy concepts that are happening, but it's something that's marked on Tuesday, but really applies to this whole general time period. Okay, so some lighter energies. I'm still talking about Tuesday, June 30th, but there's also some more minor aspects. We do have Mercury retrograde, and the sun is passing it, so Sun and Mercury are conjunct at 9 degrees Cancer. Um, what else? And then they're also squaring Chiron, which is at 9 degrees Aries. And Chiron's an asteroid which orbits outside of Saturn and before Uranus. Um, so its effects are minor, but in general, they're squaring the Sun and Mercury. Square is a harsh aspect, which which invokes change or action. So Chiron makes us more empathetic, but it can also make us more awkward. It can kind of just create this sort of weird tension in a way. It's a very strange energy. And Mercury conjoining the Sun. So Mercury is going retrograde, so it's actually going backward, and the Sun is actually appearing to pass it in the sky. And when planets get really close to the Sun, usually conjunctions make planets stronger, but when a planet passes the Sun, it's sort of burned out in a way because you can't see that planet at all. So it's almost um, like it's burned out. You can't see it or you can't feel that planet's effects. Like it's kind of off the radar, I guess. So Mercury passing the sun, Mercury represents the intellect, the logical energy, the day to day mental energy, the analysis, the media, information, communication, stuff like that. So because it's retrograde and because it's sort of burned out by the sun, you could feel kind of burned out mentally, like you're just you might feel stressed or you can't think as clearly maybe. And this is brief; it's really just applying to Tuesday. But yeah, the communication might be sort of unclear, or um, it might be difficult to plan things on Tuesday. Um, yeah, so in general, ideally, it would be a better time to just rest or not have to do so much, you know, uh, so many tasks or so much planning. It would be better to just kind of check out on Tuesday if you can. Just take it easy. Um, yeah, and then they're squaring Chiron, so there's this kind of weird, awkward energy around. But like I said, the sun and moon are still trining, so in general, the whole energy of the day is generally still kind of strong and positive and free flowing. Um, yeah, so as long as you're not like having to do too much administrative tasks or too many errands, stuff like that, that stuff could burn you out really easy on Tuesday. But other than that, things are going well. If you're just going about your normal day or doing something for fun or just doing your normal job, it should be a pretty positive day actually because of the moon and the sun trining. And then we also have Mercury and the Sun sextiling Uranus, so that could bring um, some sort of unexpected twists or turns, some epiphanies. You might realize something, just have multiple ideas, or it brings about this sort of quirky energy. So um, and this is minor. It's a very minor aspect, and it's also very quick or very brief. So just for Tuesday, there might be some just unexpected twists and turns. You might run into people you don't normally see, or you just, especially with Mercury passing the sun, like I think if you wake up on Tuesday and try to plan everything out, it's not going to go the way you think it's going to go. It will be a positive day in general for most people, but it's sort of naturally unpredictable, if that makes sense. So you have to just kind of go with it on Tuesday. Wednesday is a big deal because Saturn enters Capricorn. Again, it's going retrograde, so it's going backward from Aquarius back into Capricorn. Yeah, so right around midday Pacific time. Um, and that's a big deal too. There are a few big things happening. The moon enters Sagittarius, which is not as big a deal. But okay, so Saturn entering Capricorn. This is a really big deal because all this COVID stuff started. Well, technically, it started November of last year, but it really got out into the world and started making headlines in January. And January was when we had a 5 or 6 planet conjunction at 12 degrees Capricorn. So, including Saturn and Pluto. And Saturn and Pluto won't conjoin again this year, but the fact that Saturn is going back into Capricorn and that it's getting close to Pluto, and Pluto and Jupiter are conjunct, it basically means that we're almost experiencing January all over again, but to a lesser degree. Um, so one sort of obvious interpretation for that would be to say that there's going to be a spike in COVID cases again, or a second wave. And that's only one interpretation of this. I don't know if that will happen. There are other ways that this could happen. What I see it as is more restrictions, not as many restrictions as what we have just experienced. I don't think everything's going to completely shut down again, but I do think that there will be added restrictions of some kind, just to a lesser degree. And like I said, the most obvious explanation would be it could be because of COVID, but it could also be because of the protests. It could be about something else. I don't know. I don't know the specifics of it. But to me, this strongly indicates sort of an echo of what happened in January, and an echo of these restrictions of this tight regulation. Um, and this will continue for the next few months, going into September, early October. More restrictions for sure. More serious, more and this is more of a large scale thing. It's the government imposing restrictions, even if it's not imposing restrictions, some kind of restrictive energy where you have to get serious and you have to think for the long term. You have to be planning or be vigilant or be mindful of these sort of darker parts of reality that are affecting us on a global or at least national scale at this time, if that makes sense. Um, yeah, the past few months, Saturn's been in Aquarius, so things have been more lighter. You have more room to kind of do what you want in a way. But now that Saturn's entering Capricorn this week, unfortunately, that's kind of ending and it's becoming more serious and more heavy. Okay. Other than that, the Sun technically sextiles Uranus Wednesday, but that some of these aspects sort of affect Tuesday and Wednesday. Uh, so the Sun and Mercury conjunct, sextiling Uranus and square Chiron are sort of applying to Tuesday and Wednesday. So that's that mental burnout energy, quirky energy, awkward energy, mental burnout, or it's easy to get stressed or frazzled or overwhelmed mentally. Yeah, so just don't be in your head too much. I guess just go with it. The moon is still sort of trining the sun, so I guess in some ways it's sort of just continuing what happened on Tuesday. So um, the moon does enter Sagittarius, which is actually pretty nice because as soon as it enters Sagittarius, it trines Aries. I mean, it trines Mars in Aries. Um, for the past couple months, there weren't any fire plants, so every time the moon entered a fire sign, it became sort of unaspected. It didn't have any other fire planets to trine it or to support it. So going into Wednesday evening, the moon enters Sagittarius, so the mood becomes more jovial or fun, a little bit of a party energy, and because it's trining Mars, that gives it some really nice, strong, fiery energy. Um, and in general, every day of this week, the energy is sort of building up because the moon is waxing, which means that every day the moon's getting more light. It's becoming more full as we approach the full moon this next weekend. Okay, yeah, I pretty much explained Wednesday. Going into Thursday, July 2nd, like I said, the moon, I guess technically early on Thursday, the moon trines Mars, which I already said. So that, that jovial energy, the fiery energy, you might feel more spontaneous. This is the most fire we've experienced in a long time. So fire makes us more um, indulgent, self centered, more fun, more happy, more outgoing. Yeah, so in general, Thursday, it's kind of a minor thing because it's just the moon, but just the general vibe is more jovial, more active, more fiery, more sociable, more wanting to go out and do something, wanting to start something new. That's pretty much all I have for Thursday. There's no exact aspects, so yeah, that's really all I have. It's a little bit of fire, which is nice because we haven't experienced that for a long time. Everything's been sort of intense and maybe not so fun the past few months. So that does give us a little bit. Fire energy can be really fun for sure. So that's nice. Friday, July 3rd. The moon. I always think this is worth mentioning that there's not an eclipse yet, but the moon does conjoin the south node and oppose the north node. And what an eclipse is when the sun and the moon are both on nodes. So even if just one of them, the sun or the moon, is on a node, it's obviously not an eclipse, but you will get some eclipse energy a little bit. So I do think it's worth mentioning. So the moon, right at the end of Sagittarius, conjoining the south node, opposing the north node, is sort of a glimpse or a pre-shadowing of the eclipse that we're going to experience on Sunday. So it could be a little bit trippy. You might have this ominous feeling that something is coming, or basically, the stage is sort of being set for what's going to happen this weekend, essentially. Um, Friday, July 3rd, the moon leaves Sagittarius and enters Capricorn, so that makes the vibe more serious a little bit, more about getting to business and actually planning things. It's not such a fun energy, more of a productive energy. And I should say that it depends, depending on where you are. The moon enters Capricorn either very late Friday night or very early Saturday morning. And then Saturday, there's no exact aspects again. In general, for this time period in general, there's not a lot of exact aspects, but there's still sort of a lot going on though. So the moon enters Capricorn. Right away, it opposes Mercury and then opposes the sun. And that's where we get the eclipse. The eclipse is on Sunday. Saturday is really just building up. You'll already sort of feel the eclipse, or in other words, this eclipse sort of applies to the whole weekend. Like things are already beginning to happen that are sort of gonna unfold into what will be representative of the eclipse, or yeah, if that makes sense. So Saturday's more serious. Saturday's more. It's almost kind of backward because this week looks really nice. Like, just to go over it really quickly, Tuesday and Wednesday look more relaxed generally, more smooth, free flowing. Um, Thursday and Friday, you get a little bit of that fire, so it's more fun, more active. But then, ironically, as we start the weekend, it gets more serious and more intense. Um, it does look like there's a lot happening in the world, like people going out and doing different things, or just different events happening in the world. But there's this sort of serious tension to it because Capricorn's a very serious sign, it's a very intense sign. And also, the moon is opposing, even before the full moon lunar eclipse, it's opposing Mercury and it's beginning to oppose the sun. So when you have an opposition, you're combining two different energies that are as far away from each other as they can get. They're basically opposite. So it's difficult to integrate these two things. They sort of clash together. And we really experienced that Sunday. So I'm going to go to that chart now. Sunday, June 5th, there's no exact aspects except for the full moon. So the full moon lunar eclipse is going to happen at 14 degrees Capricorn. So I could go to the exact chart would look something like that. Yeah. So it's not this full moon lunar eclipse. A full moon is always when the sun and the moon are exactly opposite. A full moon lunar eclipse is where the sun and the moon are opposite and they're close to the nodes. So you got North Node at 29 degrees Gemini, and then the sun is at 13 degrees Cancer, moon 13 Capricorn, North Node 29 Sagittarius. And this full moon eclipse isn't exactly aspected by anything, but it's close enough. The sun is still 6 degrees away from Mercury, so it's pretty much conjunct Mercury. And then the moon isn't conjunct by aspect, but it's pretty close to Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn, all at the end of Capricorn. Okay, so what this means is, well, okay, like I said, so going back to these three larger, outer planets in Capricorn that are basically conjoining each other, like I said, they're starting a huge new chapter. They're all very serious. They're all in Capricorn, so they're all about changing our society, our government, our authority figures, all represented by Capricorn. They're all being changed dramatically by these three outer planets meeting together at the end of Capricorn. That's already been happening. But this full moon lunar eclipse, the moon is highlighting that. It's putting a spotlight on that. And so you might get some kind of event. New moon solar eclipses are much less active than full moon lunar eclipses. Full moons, when the moon's full, it has the most light, so it's sort of climaxing. It's sort of reaching the peak of the activity or the energy, and especially with the full moon lunar eclipse, you're experiencing this burst of energy or this overload of energy, this climax, and it's in the sector of government, of society, of the world, of banks or financial systems, um, organizations, stuff like that. Um, yeah. So, yeah, so it's very serious. It's very, there could be restrictions. Capricorn is sort of about restrictions in a sense, or it's becoming more organized or getting rid of what is cutting the fat, sort of, or getting rid of the excess. Rather than gaining new things, it's more about conserving. It's very conservative, very restrictive, very strict. Um, yeah, so I mean, there's many different ways that this could unfold, but I see more regulations of some sort, some kind of more restrictions, even if they're self-imposed restrictions. Maybe there's certain things that we can't do, or we have to buckle down and conserve money or conserve time, conserve some kind of resources, or could because of COVID, could be because of these protests. Um, Something as a collective, though, something in the world, something in the government, something in this in our societal systems where we have to sort of reevaluate things or become more strategic or more um, more having foresight, planning out things into the long distant future, if that makes sense. And it's this sort of clash between all of that, between being responsible and doing what we want to do personally in that moment. um, there's this clash between how we feel and what we know we need to do. And sometimes you might have to sort of balance both of those or prioritize one of those over the other this weekend. And in a way, this is sort of a big release because um, it's the last eclipse of this season. So we're finally kind of going out with a bang right now. So although eclipses begin chapters in themselves, like a lot of people say that their effects are felt for 6 months after. Um, this full moon lunar eclipse, in a way, is sort of an ending for this eclipse season. So we will get some relief of this intensity we've been feeling the last 3 weeks. Um, After Sunday, you'll still be feeling the effects for a few days in a very strong way, like a lot of high energy or a lot of commotion. But as we get some distance from this lunar full moon eclipse, things will more or less go back to what is normal. And I know, again, it's relative, so this whole year is not normal. But what I'm saying is, you'll more or less get back into a routine of some sort. Even if there's more restrictions or something like that, you'll at least get into a routine of some sort, basically. So yeah, so that's actually, it looks nice. It looks like a breath of fresh air. Again, not on the eclipse, not on Sunday, but a few days after, give it some time and things will mellow down. Okay, so yeah, that's all I have for this week. So I'll keep you updated. And yeah, I'm actually happy to be almost leaving eclipse season because it's fun, it's exciting, it's intense. There's a lot going on. If you want your life to be interesting and eventful, eclipses are great for that, especially if they aspect you. Like I should have said, if you have placements in Gemini or Sagittarius, you were very affected by these last few eclipses. If you have placements in Capricorn or Cancer, you'll be very affected by this eclipse and by the last one. The last one on June 21st, and this one July 5th. Um, so yeah, it's changing all of our lives. It's changing our direction, especially if you have Gemini, Sagittarius, Capricorn, or Cancer in your astrology. Which again, it's fun and exciting, puts you on a new track. It might reset your life in a very positive way, but by its nature, these energies are not sustainable. Um, this chapter that the past 3 months and the past 3 weeks and the next week are exciting, dynamic, interesting. Like I said, they might change your life in a very positive way, but they're built around change, and that's why they're not sustainable. If we were to experience this energy on a long term basis, everything would just be torn apart because there's just so much happening. There's so much changing. It's not sustainable. It's exciting. It's exhilarating. It's not sustainable. And I think during the more boring parts of our lives, we might wish for something like this, and it is necessary. But having gone through all this, I think some of us are just kind of wanting things to be normal again, and imagining if things ever can be normal. And I want to say that whatever you're experiencing, when you're in the midst of it, it always feels like it's going to feel that way forever. This feels like it's going to be permanent. And the truth is that it's not permanent. Nothing is permanent. Everything is impermanent. I can't remember the word I was thinking of, but everything is temporary. So this will change. We will get back into a new normal or an old normal. I don't know, but things will go back to normal at some point, and I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully, as we leave this eclipse season. So that's all I have for you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching the whole thing, and I'll see you next week. Okay, bye guys.